Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video lecture. In the earlier sessions related to the ratio analysis, we discussed about some of the formulae and interpretation of various ratios in the categories of liquidity ratios. Then, liquidity ratios are basically short-term solvency ratios. Then, long-term solvency ratios also we discussed, within which we had two subcategories: capital structure ratios as well as coverage ratios. Then turnover ratios is another category wherein the operational efficiency of the organization and performance is measured. And we were discussing about profitability ratios, again within which there are multiple categories. Only for our convenience we categorize them. Ultimately ratio is ratio. We have to remember the formula for each ratio. But even within the profitability ratios also, there are certain ratios which are profitable, which are measuring the profitability on the basis of sales, and some ratios measure the profitability on the basis of the resources employed, like capital employed or investment or equity, etc. So those are also profitability ratios. Broadly, return on investment, which is further broadly classified as return on assets and return on capital employed, also return on equity. These types of ratios we discussed in the earlier sessions, and we need to discuss about the remaining ratios of the category profitability ratios, which are more focusing from the shareholders' point of view or investors' point of view. But before going to that, let us just focus on one of the popular models in the world for computing return on equity, that is called DuPont model. And as I told earlier, DuPont is one of the big multinational organizations in the world, and this model was developed by somebody at that company long back, but this system is still used world over for the purpose of computing return on equity by simply breaking it down. See, ultimately the objective of the financial management is to maximize the wealth of shareholders, that we know. So return on equity is definitely one of the major parameters anybody will look at. So final objective is return on equity. Whatever the other things we talk about, ultimately return on equity is what everybody expects from the company. But the point is how this return on equity can be achieved. Of course, everybody wants to maximize it. So what this particular finance executive at DuPont has done is he has split the return on equity into three different components. First component is profitability or net profit margin, and we know this, there is nothing new here. So the first component of this will be net profit divided by sales. Forget about 100 because we are talking about concept here, not computation or any expression. So net profit divided by sales, of course this will give the profitability of the organization, that is net profit margin of the organization. If it is high, definitely return on equity also will be high. That is one of the components, that is profit divided by sales. Second thing is asset turnover ratio. Since we have taken already here particularly the sales earlier, now we know any turnover ratio will have in general sales as its numerator divided by, it could be investment, assets or capital. So let us, for general understanding purposes, let us call this as capital, because Assets is also okay, but capital is better. Any of them can be taken. Investment or capital, both are same. Assets also can be taken in the denominator. But of course, whatever we take in the denominator here, the same thing has to be taken as numerator later. That has to be remembered. So that these things get nullified. We will see how that happens. So the first component is telling us the net profit margin of the organization, the profitability of the organization. Second component is telling us about how effectively the capital has been employed to generate more sales. And this is what is popularly called in the corporate language as top line and bottom line. Top line is simply nothing but sales. Bottom line means profit. Every organization wants both. But the point is, the organization will have so many departments and so many responsibility centers which are responsible for certain types of activities. So what this model of DuPont tells us is, each of these particular areas, if you focus separately also no problem, but cumulatively the better performance in each of these areas will finally lead to a higher return on equity. So when the objective is to increase the return on equity, someone has to increase the net profit margin. How is it possible? Normally by reducing costs. Otherwise there is no much possibility in the competitive scenario, because usually the selling prices are constant and selling prices are in general driven by the market forces. That is why net profit or the profitability of the organization can only be enhanced with better costing. And that was the purpose of the entire subject of cost and management accounting, wherein there can be a cost control or cost reduction, and ultimately the overall monitoring on the cost, having tight budgets and strict control. Tight budgets does not mean people don't want to spend and all. It is about having a close monitoring on the costs, and having a control on those costs will only enhance the profit and profitability. So the first bottom line requirement here, which is first, which is second, doesn't matter. If you say A multiplied with B multiplied with C, it doesn't matter. If you say B multiplied with A multiplied with C also, it is same, right? So first, second, third is not the point here. Sequence does not matter. Essence matters. So any organization which wants to enhance the return on equity definitely has to increase its profitability. Practically it is possible by better operations, more efficiency, more productivity, less costs incurred for getting better profits. Simple. That is one area of operational efficiency which is generally reflected here in this segment. That is profitability. Second thing is about marketing people. They have to enhance sales. That is their job. Marketing people have to increase the sales for the same capital that is employed. By taking more and more resources, if they are increasing sales, then that doesn't make sense. So they have to have a better asset turnover or capital turnover, whatever it is. So that is generally the job of marketing department, and they should be focusing on top line. So on one side, marketing people will be always trying to increase the sales, get more customers, increase the revenues, ultimately better the top line. On the other hand, within the organization, all the people, whether it is production, procurement, HR, all the other people within the organization will try to operate more efficiently, having more productivity with lesser costs, with better monitoring on the costs, and increase the profitability. So these all things should happen simultaneously. That is the essence of the DuPont model, simply speaking. And the third one is about an equity multiplier. This is just a continuation of this formula. So what is this equity multiplier? Equity multiplier is having a numerator as the same thing what we took as denominator earlier. Since we took capital as the denominator earlier, now let us take capital as numerator here. Means capital means total capital employed. In that, how much is the shareholders' equity or equity shareholders' funds, we can call it. Usually when we say return on equity, we are talking about only equity shareholders. So let us call this as equity shareholders' funds. which is nothing but equity share capital plus reserves and surplus. In other words, this is the reciprocal. It's a reciprocal only of the equity ratio. Out of the total capital employed, how much percentage is of equity is equity ratio. But this is the reciprocal of that, and that is what DuPont people called as equity multiplier. Once you have this equity multiplier also brought into this, multiplying all these three, what will be the resultant? We know that. Simple. Sales get nullified, capital gets nullified. Ultimately, net profit, which is available to the equity shareholders, divided by equity shareholders funds. Instead of equity shareholders funds, I will take total shareholders funds. That is also okay. But in general, when we use the word return on equity, we talk about equity shareholders. Preference better to be ignored. So in that case, the net profit also has to be taken because numerator and denominator should match. That is why the net profit has to be taken after paying the preference dividend also. So profits available to the equity shareholders divided by the equity shareholders funds. We know that is the same formula of return on equity. He did not invent any new formula. What he has done is just split that formula into three different points, and we have to maximize return on equity means what are the things to be done. First point, costing, efficiency, productivity. Second point, marketing, that is increasing more sales and revenue. Third point is about capital structure. It is telling us about the capital structure. Why? Because if at all you want to increase something, the denominator should be less, right? Which automatically means here, if you use debt in the capital structure, return on equity will be more. So that's what I told earlier also. Debt is not all that bad. Increasing debt beyond a dangerous point will be not good. But definitely usage of debt in the capital structure, in the total capital, if equity shareholders funds are lesser, since denominator, if it is lesser, how is it possible? Only when debt is also there in the capital structure. So if equity shareholders funds are lesser, then only return on equity will be more. In other words, indirectly, the financial management decisions, the financing decisions of the organization by structuring the capital also will have an impact on the return on equity. So all these three put together only will enhance return on equity. So finance manager or CFO has to do his job by maintaining a reasonable amount of debt in the capital structure, which is good. It has to be there. As we know, in this technical point, it will enhance the return on equity. But at the same time, marketing people should sell more and more. At the same time, all the people in the organization should be working so efficiently and productively that the profitability is more. When all these three things happen in tandem, in coordination, then an organization will be able to achieve its final objective of maximizing its return on equity. That is DuPont model, as simple as that. So same return on equity formula is split into three formulae. Ultimately, the essence is same. So that's what is given here. Return on equity is equal to profitability divided by net profit. Sorry, or net profit margin. It is not divided by R, it is. So net profit margin, let us not confuse this. Net profit margin multiplied with investment turnover or asset turnover or capital turnover. So let us call it as capital turnover, better. Net profit margin multiplied with capital turnover multiplied with equity multiplier. But while doing equity multiplier, you have to make sure the denominator here is the numerator here. That's all. And just if you want to just apply this DuPont model as an example, this is the example. So revenue of an organization is this much. Revenue means sales. Net income means profit is this much. Assets are this much. In this case, assets are used. That's okay. No problem. It can be used. Shareholders' equity is 13,572. Calculate return on equity. So all that we need to do is put them in the model. So first thing first, there is no first thing first. Anything can be first, other things can be the latter also. There is no sequence, but since we have taken the formula, let us use the same sequence. First, taking the net profit margin 4212 divided by 29,261. So 4212 divided by 29,261. 261. How much is the net profit margin? For percentage, if at all you have to express 29 to 61, it will give approximately around 14.4%. This is one thing. Keep it aside. Second thing, asset turnover, let us call, because assets are given. Asset turnover, any turnover ratio, sales divided by that. What is that here? Assets, 27987. So 27987 are the assets. That is asset turnover. So 29261 divided by 27987. That means 1.04 or 1.05 times. Separately, if we calculate these things. Third one is equity multiplier. As we know, the same denominator taken earlier has to be taken as numerator here. In this case, assets. Shareholders' equity is 13,572. You should understand each of them. For a sales of 29,261, they made a net profit of 4212. For assets employed 27,987, by using those assets, they made a sales of 29,261. Out of these 29,987 assets, 13,572 are funded by equity. Naturally, remaining are funded by debt. We don't care about it. That is just understood. So 27,987 divided by 13,572 will give equity multiplier of 2.06 times, let us say. Then, according to DuPont model, all that we need to do is multiply all of them. 4.4, which is a percentage, 14.4, multiply with 1.05, multiply with 2.06. So 14.4 multiplied with 1.05, multiplied with 2.06. Return on equity is how much percentage? 31.15 percentage approximately. Instead of doing all this, straight away we can do this also. 4212 divided by 13,572. Because these things will get nullified. So 4212 divided by 13,572 also gives approximately the same thing, around 31.04%, around 31%, let us say. Of course, decimals will be different. Since we have done separately and multiplied, answer will be different. If you do directly, answer will be different. Around 31%, let us say. That's it. That is how DuPont model can be applied, by taking three different formula and then multiplying them. Essence is still the same. Return on equity is nothing but net profit divided by the shareholders' funds. That's all. That is one more type of profitability ratio. Now let us move on to the third category within the profitability ratios, which are very, very important ratios also in future also for financial management subject. And these ratios are required for analysis from owner's point of view. Owners are naturally shareholders. Normally, we're talking about equity shareholders. Ordinary shareholders means equity shareholders. Common stock, common shareholders, ordinary shareholders, equity shareholders, all of them are same, used synonymously. So one of those formulae is earnings per share. Of course, point to be noted here, computation of earnings per share according to accounting standard 20 is different. That will be done separately. That will be part of advanced accounting subject. AS 20 tells us about computation of earnings per share, but that is not what we are looking at here. We have to completely distinguish them. Logic may be same, but purpose for which we are using it or context in which we are using this is completely different. So don't mix the earnings per share computation of accounting standards here. That is separate, this is separate. It has to be kept separate. As far as FM is concerned, which is a logical formula, simple formula, we don't need a huge discussion on this. A simple formula is that net profit available to the equity shareholders divided by number of equity shares outstanding. So, simple formula, net profit available to equity shareholders, we know that what it is. What is that? That is net profit after tax, after paying the preference dividend also, if any. That is the net profit available to equity shareholders, divided by number of equity shares. So, profit available to equity shareholders divided by number of equity shares is what is earnings per share. Logical. Total profit, this is for the entire company. Per share, how much, how do you get? Divided by number of shares. You will get earnings per share. That is one of the measures. Of course, higher it is, better for the shareholders. They would like this to be higher, naturally. Second formula here is dividend per share. Name itself indicates. Dividend to whom? Again, we are talking about equity shareholders, not preference. So, dividend payable, if at all it is declared by the company, if it is paid by the company, then how much is that? If it is not there, dividend per share will be 0. Imagine if a company definitely has paid dividend, then what is the total dividend that is paid to the equity shareholders? Denominator is same, number of equity shares outstanding. So, as the name itself indicates, earnings per share will tell us earnings per share. As the name itself indicates, dividend per share will tell us dividend per share. So, how much is the total dividend paid to the equity shareholders divided by number of equity shares will give us this dividend per share. That is another formula. And there may be sometimes dividend per share. If the company does not declare dividend, there will not be any dividend per share. But of course, most of the shareholders, there is no rule like that, generally expect dividend per share also to be there. One of the expectations of equity shareholders generally will be to receive some dividend also, in general. So, dividend per share higher generally is considered to be a good sign for many people. Again, those are all debatable issues. Whether dividend per share should be there or not, should it be high or not, for that purpose we have a separate chapter altogether that is called dividend policy. We don't have to worry about it now, but the same concepts will definitely be useful there also. That is why I was talking about this third and fourth category of profitability ratios are not only for ratio analysis. They are all going to be used many number of times in future in FM. So, care has to be taken. Definitely thoroughness is required in remembering this formula and understanding them. Of course, there is no rocket science because these are all names also simple. Earnings per share, dividend per share. So, each of them has the formula also similar to the name. Denominator is number of equity shares. Numerator is either earnings. Earnings means total earnings. Earnings not for the company. Earnings available to the equity shareholders in the numerator for EPS. Dividends paid to the shareholders is in the numerator for DPS. Now, very important formula, dividend payout ratio. Payout. If you remember the name and concept, easy to remember the formula also. Dividend payout means out of the earnings which are earned, how much is paid out as dividend. Let us say a particular company has earned 1000 crores and after all taxes and payment of preference dividend, all equity shareholders have available profits for distribution 1000 crores. Let us say earnings available to equity shareholders or profits available to equity shareholders 1000 crores. Is it compulsory that it has to pay dividend? There is no compulsion. If it pays, let us say it pays say 600 crores as dividend. The company wants to distribute 600 crores as dividend. What does it mean? Remaining 400 crores, it is plowing back. That is called as plowing back of profits. These are all important technical terms to be remembered by the finance people all the time. Of course, that plowing back results in what? That results in retained earnings. And where do we see them in the financial statements? Naturally, under the reserves and surplus. These are accumulated profits of the organization, retained earnings. So, the policy of the company to pay dividend or not is reflected in this dividend payout ratio. In this example, what is the dividend payout ratio? 60% means for every 100 rupees of earnings, 60 rupees is distributed as dividend. 60% is the dividend payout ratio. Dividend payout ratio. So, naturally 40% is called as retained earnings ratio automatically because these two are complements to each other. So, if dividend payout ratio is 60%, 40% will be retained earnings ratio or retention ratio it is called. That will also be useful later. We will use that very well in future. So, These names and formulae and concepts have to be very, very thoroughly remembered and understood. So as the name indicates, pay out. Paying out from where? Where from the company will pay out? From the earnings. So out of the EPS, how much it is paying? DPS. So DPS by EPS is dividend payout ratio. Simple. And the complement of this will be retention ratio. Though it is not here, it is automatically to be understood. The remaining will be called as retention ratio or retained earnings ratio. But so far, here we have these three very crucial ratios: EPS, DPS and payout ratio. So payout ratio indicates how much percentage of the earnings have been distributed as dividend. Let us say there is no dividend. Payout ratio is 0. DPS is 0. When numerator is 0, ratio also will be 0. That's a different story. But normally when the company pays some dividend out of its earnings, how much it is paying? How much percentage of its earnings it is distributing to the shareholders as dividend? And by the way, in all these things and what we are looking at are equity shareholders only. That has to be looked at. When we say EPS also, we are talking about equity shareholders. So owner is equity shareholder only. DPS also we are talking about equity shareholder only, because for preference shareholders we don't have to compute all these things, because anyway it will be fixed. It is already known. There is nothing to specially compute. So for equity shareholders, how much is the percentage of payout of dividend is told by or expressed by the dividend payout ratio. These are the third category of profitability ratios from the owner's point of view. Now moving much ahead, let us move to market. Market means stock market. Stock market means we are talking about potential investors, potential shareholders. There may be some existing shareholders also, but some people want to buy shares of this company or sell the shares of this company. How do they take those decisions? In reality, they take those decisions by considering many factors. Again, we cannot go into those things because our job here is not to become a stock trader. That is none of our business. But we should know how the stock market works in general and what kind of analysis. Basically, this is called fundamental analysis that many analysts do while making their investments. So that fundamental analysis is mostly based on all these ratios only. So the ratios what we are learning now, lot of them are useful in the fundamental analysis. So ratio analysis is automatically, not all the ratios, but many of them are useful for the fundamental analysis while investing in the stock market. However, let me once again and again I will remind you also, don't think that by knowing these ratios you are understanding stock market. Don't think that by having the ability of computing these ratios about the companies, once you know the formula, you can compute these ratios for any company. You download the annual report of any company and you can compute the ratios of any company. That capability is there when you know the formula and the concept of the formula very well. But just that ability does not tell anything about our ability of investing in the stock market or ability of making money in the stock market. That is absolutely a myth. Fundamental analysis is only one part of investment strategy. It is not the only thing. There are a lot of things beyond it which we don't need to know. We are only focusing on the ratio analysis. From the market point of view, what types of ratios will be generally calculated? Look at these ratios, very popular ratios. Daily you can see them in the newspapers also, particularly when you look at business pages or even in any of the websites also. These ratios can be easily found, like price earnings ratio, dividend yield, that is a very popular ratio also. Third one is called market to book value, generally called as MBV, market to book value. Q ratio is also there, that's separate, that's okay. But majorly the first three are popular ratios. That does not mean Q ratio is not popular, but mostly used ratios are PE ratio, important one. PE ratio, this word you will use in FM many number of times in future also. So you have to remember this PE ratio, but there is no rocket science in that. The good news here is PE, name itself is there. What is P? Price. Which price? Market price per share. What is E? Earnings. earnings per share. There ends the matter. That is the formula. Market price per share divided by earnings per share. So naturally this ratio changes very frequently, even in seconds. When the market price of any particular share changes in the stock market, automatically PE ratio also changes. EPS will not change in seconds and minutes. That will be generally the latest declared EPS according to the latest published financial statements of the organization. But market price per share definitely will keep on changing. So PE ratio is also normally dynamic. It keeps on changing. Forget about too many dynamics within the day, but definitely it changes from day to day. Today PE ratio of a company is different, tomorrow PE ratio of the company could be completely different. So where the difference is coming from? Because of the fluctuations in the market price. Market prices keep on fluctuating. So what does this PE ratio indicate? It indicates for a particular level of earnings, the market is ready to pay how much price per each share. Let us say a particular share is having a 2 rupees per share earning. If the market price of that share is, let us say, 22 rupees, that means the market is ready to pay 11 times of its earnings. Market means not 1%, 2%. Lakhs of people, thousands of people trading. Effective final resultant of all that is the market price per share. Lot of buying, selling happens. Essence of all that is what? The market price per share that is declared. Let us say at the end of the trading day. At the end of the day, whatever is the market price divided by earnings per share, which is anyway according to the latest published financial statements of the organization, will give us PE ratio 11 times. Now, just for understanding purposes, not that exactly it is same. If you just recollect goodwill computations, normally in accounting, particularly partnership accounting, goodwill is computed by taking a number of years purchase, right? Number of years purchase of normal profits or super profits. Let us take normal profits or average profits. So what is this number of years purchase? In other words, let us say the average profits of a firm are 1 lakh, and if the firm is agreeing to, if somebody who is coming into the firm is agreeing to pay 4 years of that as goodwill, why is he paying? Because now he is entering into the firm, but the firm is going to make money in future, which he will also have a share of. So because of he entering into the firm as a partner newly, he cannot just like that get the benefits of the firm without bringing any goodwill. That is a concept. Normally that applies in the partnership firms and accounting for them. The question comes here, what is this number of years purchase? Who will tell that? For you, it was not a problem because it will be told in the question. Oh, 3 years purchase, 4 years purchase, it has to be given in the question. But in real life, who will tell that? That has to be agreed between the partners, right? In the stock market, logically, it is the same. When you say 11 times you are purchasing the earnings, that means 11 years profits you are purchasing now by paying that much price. That's what it is. So the PE ratio is indicative of how much a person is intending to pay in order to become a shareholder, how many times of earnings he is ready to pay for purchasing this share. That's what is PE ratio. So if PE ratio is high, only possibilities are there. Which is high, which is low is again debatable. Nobody can generally tell that. Normally in a bullish market, PE ratios will be skyrocketing. In a bearish market, PE ratios will be very low. So what does it mean? If a PE ratio is high, what does it mean? Again, it means two things. Most of the times, everything means two things because every coin will have both sides. Same logic applies in FM. PE ratio high means what? It means this is a very, very reputed company. People are very happy about this company. Investors are very confident about this company. And that shows the confidence of the investors in the company. They are ready to pay very high price also for standard earnings, whatever the earnings it is. Why are they able to? Why are they willing to pay? Because they have confidence in the company's future. They think that this company will do well. The share price of the company will go up in future. That is the confidence they are showing by paying higher price for the company or company share. Company means company share. That is one interpretation which can be drawn. Second interpretation which can be drawn is the share is overvalued. It also happens sometimes. Certain shares are very heavily overvalued. Very heavily. We cannot tell that. If one person says it is overvalued, he will be called as a pessimistic person. And the one person, definitely, the opposite to him will be there in the market. Then only the market works. For every buyer, there is a seller. For every bull, there is a bear. But who will actually and finally win on a particular day, that is the game which they play. You don't have to be too much interested in that game. But the point is, both perspectives will be there. If there are two people, if one person is still bullish about this company, still very positive and having a lot of confidence about this company, higher PE also he will not care, he will still go and buy this share. Because that interpretation by him is, when entire market is liking this company's share, there should be something in it, no? Something good. I will also buy. That is the thought process of a buyer. Same higher PE ratio can be looked at negatively also by somebody else. You may call him pessimist, you may call him a bear. These are all names in the stock market, bulls, bears, etc. Bulls are those people who want the market to go up and shares prices to go up. Bears are the people who want the prices to go down. They don't want the prices to go down because not that they intend to lose. Even within this going down also they want to make profit. So they are pessimistic. So optimistic are bulls, pessimistic are bears. There's a market terminology. And of course these names are all coming from American slang, American language, financial language. In financial management, what we are going to see in future also, a lot of times we refer to American language just for as a precursor. We should be also open-minded in accepting that language. That will not be so sophisticated like British language, which we learned from childhood in India. Since we are ruled by British, our language mostly is British English. But American language will not be that sophisticated, that polished. That is like very brute, open, or frank, harsh, whatever you want to call it. Or if you want to call it cheap, that's okay. Some people call it that. Doesn't matter. End of the day, in finance field, we have to follow American English only. There is no option because they are the ones who created all these things. If you go back to the word stock market, there also, that word itself is different. We call this, daily we see this, so stock market, stock market. Everybody knows this word. But what is stock? What is stock? If you are going to a place where vegetables are sold, you call that vegetable market. If you go to a place where fish is sold, it is a fish market. You go to a place where gold is sold, that is gold market. Where shares are sold, it should be shares market, na? Why are we calling it a stock market then? Normally speaking, any market is prefixed by its name. Vegetable market, fish market, gold market. Like that, it should be shares market. No. Why are we not calling it as a shares market? We are calling it stock market. Simple. Because Americans call that stock market. Because in America, people call shares as stock. Don't bring your company law knowledge here. Shares, stock, those are all different. That stock is not what we are looking at. Here, we are talking about an American language which uses stock. They don't call equity shares. They call it common stock. They don't call shares at all, first of all. They call it stock. And preferred stock. They don't call equity shares preference shares. We call them equity shares preference shares. That is British English. American language, common stock, preferred stock, like that. So, for them, stock means shares. Where stock is sold and bought, that is stock market, simple. That's why they kept the name. We are also following it blindly, so we have to follow, no option. Like this, many language related points will be there in American English, particularly in the financial sector. So bulls, bears, stacks, this entire language of animals is there in the stock market. Bullish, bearish, etc. So why people are called bulls? Maybe if you observe, if at all, New York Stock Exchange, in the front of it there will be a very huge sculpture of big bull, black color one, like that. So why is that? Generally, a bull kills the prey by keeping that person and hitting him from down to up. It will do that way. So those who want to go upwards are called bulls. That is why the bull name is coming, nothing else. It is there from decades, if not centuries. So the same name is used for those people who are optimistic and who wish that or who expect that the markets will go up. Those are bulls. Bears normally kill their prey by crushing them under their feet. That's what animals do. So bulls will kill a person by actually keeping the person upwards with its horns, and it will throw the person up. If at all you observed any bull, though it should not be like enjoyed, but still a lot of times it so happens. Recently also one video was viral where one bull has killed an old man. How it will do? It will just kill the person by kicking him up with its horns. So bulls look up. Bears I have not seen how they kill, but maybe people say that while they kill, they will put their prey under their legs and kill them. So they want the things to go down. So bulls go up, bears go down. Simple. That's all. That is bulls and bears. So this is a stock market language. A lot of other people are also will be there like stags, etc. We don't need to know all of that, and that is not our syllabus also, not required also. But the point is, two people will definitely have opposite views. One person having a higher PE ratio, if he looks at a company with higher PE ratio, he thinks that, oh, this is a very good company because all the public has a lot of confidence in that company. It's a very reputed company. Then only higher PE ratio will be there, otherwise it will not be there. PE ratios of a lot of companies are so huge, 30, 35, 40, like that also PE ratios are there. Just by looking at them, we may think, oh, that much PE ratio is too much. But who are we to say? Market has given the price, not you, not me. The numerator is not determined by anybody. So PE ratio is also determined by market in a sense. So that is interpreted by a person as good sign if he is a bull or his thought process is bullish. But the same higher PE ratio will be interpreted by another person who is bearish as if the company is overvalued. Okay, the share may be good, but market is doing overaction. People are mad. People are like bakra. They are all like just following the market, and they are all buying this share with a over optimism of thinking that the share price will go up in future. Because of that, people are all buying madly. Mad rush happens. Like this so many times it happened in the international markets, whether it is American markets or Indian markets, or for that matter any other markets. A lot of times bubble is built, markets went up, people were all bullish, but the actual valuations of the companies were not matching to their performance. So it was all people's just maniac reactions and maniac actions, which kept those stock markets high, the prices of the shares high. So at those higher levels, bears will think, "Oh, this is too much, this is overvalued." So that's not considered to be a good sign. So the same higher PE ratio is considered by two different people in two different ways. That's what is the interpretation of PE ratio. Of course, lower PE ratio also will have opposite thing. Let us say a particular company's PE ratio is low, if at all. If PE ratio of a company is low, again there will be an optimistic point and pessimistic point. Somebody will think that it is undervalued share. It's a good share, having a good earnings per share, but still Market is not giving its due credit. It is not giving the correct price that the share really deserves. So it is undervalued. It means it is an opportunity to buy. People will take that kind of call. Or some other people may think that this is a useless stock. I means penny stock or not so reputed thing. When market is not having confidence in this, then only PE ratio will be low, right? Then only the prices will be low, right? That means this is not a good stock. When I say stock, a share, both are same normally used interchangeably. American language is stock, so mostly that is what is used. So both interpretations are possible even when the P is low. So nobody can say higher P is good, lower P is good, which is bad. Nobody can say that because for the same thing, people have multiple interpretations, perspective. So it is completely depending upon the perspective of the investors. We cannot say only one person is correct, other person is wrong. That is never possible because it is market. So that is the interpretation of PE ratio, very important logic to understand. So a higher PE ratio can mean that the company stock is overvalued. A pessimist will think like that. Or investors are expecting higher growth rates in future, means investors are bullish about it. The people like this stock. We can say both. We can't say that one is correct, one is wrong. So both of them are interpretations, but same person will not do both interpretations. That will be depending upon the view of the person, perspective of the person, whatever that person thinks. That's how it is. Just for general understanding, anyway, nowadays all these things are not possible. Movies themselves are not there, even if they are there because of multiplexes, reservation, already booking and all. The concept of black tickets is not much rampant now, like earlier it used to be. In our student days, when we used to go to movies, almost most of the times on the first day or second day, if you want to watch the movie of your favorite hero, you have to pay very high price. That is called black tickets, and the black ticketing was very high, rampant. Those were days when even in some cases for a 50 rupees ticket that was sold for 1000 rupees also on the first day, 3000 also, and there used to be competitions on that. This hero's ticket went for 3000, that hero's ticket went for 5000, other hero's ticket went for only 1000. Like this also there used to be competitions and comparisons. What does it mean again? If you think about it now, even to be frank, if I think about it now about myself also, it all looks stupid. We did all these things unnecessarily, buying black tickets and all. Okay, why could not you have waited for 3-4 days and watch it? No, that age it was different. So you have to watch it, means you have to watch it, you have to somehow get the tickets. So we used to pay higher prices for that. At that age, it looks good, it feels good, and if somebody says it is bad also, we won't listen to that. We will say, no, this hero is good because I like him, I have to go at any cost. That is the perspective of that person. Same thing. Imagine an young guy buying black tickets in front of the theater, or thousands of people almost fighting for tickets, cinema tickets, and a reasonably mid-aged person walking outside the theater and looks at all these young people. He thinks they are all stupid. And the young people inside who are all fighting for the tickets, they think they are all doing a great job. Perspective different. What they are doing is same. We can't say it is good, we can't say it is bad, depending upon how you think about it. Of course, here there is an age difference, but we are not talking about age here. In the case of stock market, people can be of any age, we don't know. That has no relevance at all in stock market. But perspective can be completely different. So one person may interpret it in one way, other person can interpret the same thing completely in a different way, opposite way actually. Then only the market works. And it is not bad. That is the way the market works. So having differences of opinion is the basis of market, like it is the basis of democracy also at a broader level. But that is a different discussion. But as far as market economy is concerned, and even particularly the stock markets are concerned, there will be differences of opinions and there will be different perspectives also. For a same product, one person may feel it is very overpriced, another person may feel it is underpriced. Both are possible. So it is all the interpretation which a person takes. That is the importance of P/E ratio. Very, very crucial. Of course, formula is very simple. Market price per share divided by earnings per share. But interpretation of that is very important. Not for us in real life mostly. Then dividends yield and earnings yield. You have to remember this formula. I told you these all will be useful later also in other chapters also. Particularly the third and fourth segments of profitability ratios. Dividend yield, earnings yield. So usually we don't need to worry much about this changes in the share price and all that, because we are talking dividend only. We are not talking about the yield from the share as it is. So forget about this formula. It is simple formula. Dividend yield means dividend per share divided by market price per share into 100. So DPS by MPS multiplied with 100. That's what is dividend yield. Another very important formula in real life, because people don't understand this yield concept. Because when people look at this happened actually, normally a lot of financially illiterate people also participate in stock market, unfortunately. But still, we can't help that. That is their problem, and they might end up losing their money. That is also their problem. Why do they do that? Is they look at the newspaper. Newspaper headline will say, so and so company XYZ Limited has declared 80% dividend. 80% dividend. That is the news, and you see that. It's not very big amount also actually. It is a common thing. A lot of companies declare 200% dividend also, 240% dividend also. Of what? That people don't know. They are only interested in this number. 80% dividend, 80% dividend this company is paying. Oh, what a great company. What they will interpret it as, okay, if I give 100 rupees to the company, it will give me 80 rupees back. That much level of foolishness will be there. Don't be surprised. There are people, I am talking about personal experience of meeting such people. And they actually gave me class telling that you don't know. I said, okay, fine. It is your ignorance, what I can do. I told it will not work like that, Baba. Who will give you 80 rupees for 100 rupees in 1 year? That is it. Doesn't make sense. But still, no, they don't listen, because fools cannot be always completely educated. Can't help it. And these are not uneducated people. I'm talking about highly educated people only. But financially uneducated in the sense they don't know markets. They don't know all these technical terms. But they want to read Economic Times, Business Line, etc. And they want to get some tips from others and somehow make some money. So with that, they will look at this newspaper and they think that for every 100 rupees that they invest, they will get 80 rupees back. It's the interpretation, but it is not the case. When the company declares 80% dividend, boss, that is declared on par value. We also call that face value. That percentage is calculated on what? Percentage is always important to be calculated. On what is important? Percentage is okay. Somebody got 20% of what? 20% of what? 30% of what? That has to be known. But if you don't look at that, only look at this percentage, oh wow, it looks great. That is nonsense. Reality is what? That percentage is calculated on par value or face value of the share. Imagine face value of the share is, let us say, 10 rupees. Face value. That means each shareholder will get 8 rupees per share dividend. That is okay. That is reality. But what these people will think like is, the market price of the share actually now is 535 rupees. Market price of the share will be different from face value. We all know that. So, when market price of the share is 535 rupees, they think they will get 80% of this. That is a foolishness. They don't get 80% of the market price. They get 80% of face value. So this statement itself has to be interpreted carefully, and that is not what we are bothered. I am talking about the fools who don't understand. We are not bothered about that. This itself is not at all required for us. Our requirement is what? Boss, how much is the dividend per share? 8 rupees. That is important. How much is the market price per share? 535 rupees. Actually, dividend yield is how much? Actually, dividend yield is how much? 8 divided by 535 multiplied with 100 means exactly 1.5% approximately. That's all. What the other person thought? 80% return he thought. He will not get 80% return, boss. He will get only 1.5% return on his actual investment, because he is not paying face value to buy the share now. He is paying market price per share now to buy the share. So, what is the formula for this dividend yield? Is dividend per share divided by market price per share multiplied with 100 for expression as a percentage. That is dividend yield. Means if you invest in the company's share now, if you buy it now, at what price you will buy? Naturally at market price. That is investment in the denominator. For the investor we are talking, not for company. Then how much will be the return for the shareholder in the form of dividend per share? So that is the yield which the share gives to the shareholder in the form of dividend yield. That is one of the profitability ratios useful for naturally shareholders and investors. That is the formula for it. Like this, earnings yield also can be calculated, though earnings may not be distributed, but still they are belonging to the shareholders only, right? So earnings yield also can be calculated. Only change will be what? When we want earnings yield, earnings per share divided by market price per share. Denominator is same, dividend yield, earnings yield. Denominator is same, that is market price per share. Numerator is changing. If it is dividend yield, which is more popular, it is going to be DPS by MPS. If it is earnings yield, it is going to be EPS by MPS. That's all. That is the other formula for analysis of the stocks. A lot of companies publish this data also, so that you can directly look at these numbers. Anyway, moving on to another formula. This is called MBV popularly in the market. Market price per book value. Market price divided by book value. So price to book also is the word used in real life. PTB it is called also. Price to book, they call it. That is colloquial usage. What does it mean? Price to book. Price means market price per share. 2 means divided by. Book means book value per share. Book value will be different. Book value will be what? Book value will be according to the financial statements. So overall share price, generally average or closing, whatever it is, that is numerator. Share price is market price per share divided by book value per share. So how to calculate book value per share? That is different story. Book value per share can be easily calculated as equity shareholders funds. Equity shareholders funds, right, divided by number of equity shares. So what is equity shareholders funds also called as? That is also called net worth. Because we are talking about equity, we should better take only equity shareholders. Net worth sometimes includes preference also, so that has to be excluded. Only equity shareholders funds divided by number of equity shares will give us book value per share. Okay, other way I will calculate book value. Ultimately it will be the same. What is book value per share? Equity share, right? We are talking about equity share. What is book value? Assets. Assets include fixed assets, current assets. Okay, fine. Minus what? Liabilities. Assets minus liabilities is net worth, right? Outside liabilities. What are outside liabilities? Current liabilities also, non-current liabilities also. And the preference shareholders funds also, which is like generally preference share capital. Then what is remaining? Same thing. That is equity shareholders funds. Names are different. You can call it net worth sometimes, but net worth is little sometimes misleading, but still net worth also you consider as if it is belonging only to the equity shareholders. Equity shareholders funds divided by number of equity shares will give us book value per share. So that will be denominator. Market price per share is a numerator. So it is called price to book ratio. What does this indicate? Of course, this indicates how many times the market is paying for the share whose book value is 1. Let us say book value per share is 1. If market is paying 2.5 something, that means market is accepting that this book value is lower, but real worth of the company is higher. So price to book value will give us again confidence of the people in the share. That's what is PTB or price to book value. So that is the market response of the shareholders investment. So naturally if the higher of the ratio is there, for shareholder it is better position who is already a shareholder. But once again, for a potential investor, interpretations can be two types. In my personal view, if the price to book value PTB is less than 1, it is a good buy. Again, not for every Tom, Dick and Harry shares. There will be always a lot of penny stocks which are useless stocks, mostly in the mid cap and small cap segments. There also you can find some of the stocks with less than 1 PTB, price to book value. Means what? Even book value is, let us say, for that company, total worth of the company according to the books of accounts is 1000 crores. Market capitalization, which is market price, is less than that. Let us say it is only 900 crores. Means, just for imagination, if you sell the company now also, at least if it gets book value also, you will be able to realize 1000 crores. But the market is pricing that company's share at only 900, means less than 1. So price to book value less than 1 is a good buy. Of course, I'm not suggesting you to buy, I'm only telling the interpretation of it. Price to book value of more than 1, subject to interpretation. More than 1 is normal actually. Less than 1 is a very rare scenario. Occasionally it happens. That is actually an opportunity for many people. If at all they think that it is a good buy. Not necessarily everybody thinks like that. They may also think that it is a useless stock. It is not a very reputed stock. Market is not happy with this stock. Same like PE ratio. Interpretations for PTB also can be double-sided. So more than 1 is normal, because we know that very well. Book values will never represent the real worth of the assets in general. Especially if a company is having assets like land. Imagine, only again, not to take any examples or cues from whatever my names or examples are. Just for examples, we take the names. Let us say Godrej is there. So Godrej company has hundreds of acres of land in the heart of the city in Mumbai, Vikhroli area. Godrej company has that much. Of course, it has transferred that to Godrej Properties and all. It's a different story. Group, which company within that group, we don't care. Godrej Group has hundreds of acres of land in Mumbai, heart of the city. In Mumbai, even square feet of land also is like valuable. Square yard is like running into lakhs of rupees. Like that, 1 acre means huge number of crores, and they have hundreds of acres, not just 1 or 2. So imagine what could be the real value of that in the actual life on the ground. It runs into thousands of crores. But will the book value be the same? No, it will not be. Maybe they would be continuing to record that land at some lakhs of rupees in their books of accounts. Anyway, land will not have any depreciation in accounting, so it will continue at the same rate. Of course, according to the recent changes in the accounting standards, they can revalue these things, which are also done by some of the companies. It's a different story. But in general, most of the companies will have very lesser values attached to their assets in their financials, which means the actual worth of the assets in real life will be generally more than what they are shown in the books of accounts, generally. So what happens? The book value itself is the basic amount that a company can get even if you sell it now. Though nobody is going to buy the share with a liquidation point of view, going concern will be there. But still, worst case scenario, if the company is sold tomorrow, also you will get 1000 crores, but market valuation of that company is only 900 crores, which is a good buy, right? Like that, some people interpret. Personally, I also use it to interpret earlier. Like that, PTB less than 1 is a good buy. Of course, for reputed companies, not for any Tom, Dick and Harry companies. Sometimes back, not now, certain companies like Tisco, Telco, went to very much below PTB, very much below 1. That was a time to buy. So that was a time to invest. So yes, I did that. I'm talking about long back. I'm not dealing in shares anymore since I joined or started into the profession of teaching. Prior to that, when I used to buy the shares with this analysis, almost most of the times it used to be profitable. Why? Because the analysis is on the basis of proper numbers. That is fundamental analysis. One of that is price to book less than 1. So point is a lesser PE, but not too much high PE, a reasonable PE, let us call it, and price to book value, price to book ratio of less than 1, a reasonable PE, a high dividend yield, let us say more than 5%, very rare, very rare. A reasonable PE, price to book ratio of less than 1, dividend yield of more than 5%. If at all, this is what generally I used to do in the search criteria, and a list will come. Thousands of companies will come, out of them 99.9 will be useless. But there if you see something like Telco, Tisco, suddenly, definitely those are good buys. Not now, again, I'm giving an example of at least 10 years old flashback. So this type of analysis is useful for investors is only what we have to know. Not that we have to do or you have to invest. Should not do that. No. A lot of other factors also will be there. Social, political, international, geopolitical. So many things will be there in investing. So don't think just knowing fundamental analysis or knowing these ratios will make you an eligible investor. That is the disclaimer and warning I keep on giving to you. Because I have seen people who took this wrong and almost burned their hands. So don't do that. And I also tell this sometimes. So if at all that much of stock market type of itching is there, you better join that after completion of chartered accountancy as a fund manager. You will not become fund manager directly, but in that kind of field wherein there is trading, you can join. So that you don't have to play with your own money, rather you will play with others' money. Analysis, decision making will be yours, but you will be playing with others' money. So becoming a fund manager is the only way of going to that level of playing with others' money. In India, there are so many fund managers, investment managers, whatever we call them. So many mutual funds are there, Kotak, ICICI, all the banks almost have their mutual funds. And who will be the fund managers? Normally chartered accountants only. CA, CFA. Most of the times both. Like that, those will be the fund managers. And they manage thousands of crores, not just 1 crore, 2 crores. One fund manager sometimes manages 10,000 crores, 15,000 crores, like that. So that is something, a level where you can really talk about investment on behalf of others. Before reaching to that level of at least completion of chartered accountancy, better to be away from this is my sincere suggestion. Knowing is important because we are part of that field. We are also supposed to be knowing these things. Knowing is different, playing is different. That is the difference. So anyway, these are the ratios which are popular and very useful in the real life, also in the market investment decisions also. So EPS, DPS, dividend payout ratio, PE ratio, dividend yield, earnings yield, both of them. Then price to book ratio or market value to book value ratio. These are all various market ratios, we can call them. Q ratio is something which is different. It's difficult to actually find out also. Why? Because see, market value of the company is there in the numerator. That's okay. Market value of the company is nothing but number of shares multiplied with market price. See, number of shares outstanding, total number of shares outstanding, equity shares obviously we're talking, multiplied with market price per share. That's what we call as market capitalization. You would have heard this word also. That's called market capitalization. So Reliance Industries has these many lakhs of crores of market capitalization. The other company has this many lakhs of crores of market capitalization. We hear this. What does this market capitalization mean? Simply the number of shares multiplied with market price of the shares. So that is market capitalization. In other words, that is the value of the company as contemplated by the market. Not by one, not by two, by all the people put together, we call them as market. That is market capitalization. And that market capitalization is the numerator. Denominator is the biggest tricky point. Assets replacement cost. Who knows that? Investors, how can they know the asset replacement cost? That is absolutely rubbish. That is why I say Q ratio is not something that can be calculated normally in real life. If it is there, if it is given, of course, yes. If you have information, then you can find out, as James Dobbin has told this Q ratio. So market value of the company or market capitalization of the company divided by the replacement cost of the assets, not the book value of the assets, replacement cost of the assets. If you take that, that will be taken as Q ratio. So usually, what does it indicate? Usually this represents the relationship between the market valuation and the intrinsic value. And when it is Q ratio 1, it is good. That means the price of the share is reasonably priced. If it is less than 1, that means the stock is undervalued. If it is more than 1, it could be meaning that the stock is overvalued. That is the interpretation of Q ratio. But once again, both the data, both the numerator, denominator, if they are given, then we can find out this. Otherwise, normally it is not a commonly used ratio, even from examination point of view also. Even in real life also, no, not that much. Anyway, these are the various profitability ratios related to investors and markets. Notes for calculating ratios, more or less we know this. Same things are repeated. EBIT is nothing but PBIT. Earnings after tax is nothing but profits after taxes. Same thing with EBT or PBT, whatever it is. In the absence of preference shares and preference dividend, profit after tax itself is the earnings available to equity shareholders. If preference shareholders related details are not given, you cannot search for them. It is not there means not there. Not every company will have preference shares. In fact, 99.9% of the companies in the world will not have preference shares. So that is a very exceptionally issued type of shares. Why is that and all? Also, we'll come to it later in the cost of capital, capital structure chapter. But in spite of that, on the books and in the calculations, it will be there for us. So we cannot ignore it. It will be there. Always it will be coming and somehow disturbing us. But point to be noted is, if in the question it is not there, it is not there. There is nothing to worry about it. That means only equity shares are there. Then, normally, while taking capital employed, instead of taking just capital employed, even average capital employed also can be taken, no problem, if information is available. Same way. We know this already. Always this is the same thing which has to be remembered in mind. Ratios will be calculated based on the requirement and availability of information. One thing is requirement according to the question. Second is availability of information in the question. So it might deviate from the original formula. You cannot be rigid. You have to be flexible in applying these ratios while solving the problems. For that purpose, you should remember the ratios thoroughly. Numerator and denominator should be in correspondence with each other. That is a common logical point also, which has to be always observed. That's all. These are the various ratios, formulae, and interpretation of them. And other things like who are the users of these ratios normally can be understood, of course. Shareholders will be there, existing people, potential investors, future investors will be there. Mostly they will be interested in these type of ratios. So these can be theory questions, you can generally go through them. Lenders will be interested in even coverage ratios, solvency ratios, etc. Creditors will be interested in liquidity ratios. Employees will be interested in whatever ratios they want because that is their company also. Government will also be interested in knowing the profitability ratios, etc. Like this, each of these users will have their own focus point on the ratios. But why are we learning all of them? Because we could be any one of them, right? We can be probably working in government in future. We could be probably working with a bank where we will be playing the role of a lender. Maybe we'll be working within the company, reporting to the management, and management is interested in some ratios. So at learning level, every finance student, naturally in this case CA student, should know all these ratios. But in reality, all the ratios will not be used in one shot. That is not required also. For us, it is required because academically, we should be thorough with all of them. That is the essence we should carry and take from this chapter. And that will be useful for evaluating the performance. All these things we already discussed. Liquidity position is evaluated, long-term solvency is evaluated by the ratios, operating efficiency and overall profitability also is evaluated. Inter-firm comparison can happen when you compare the ratios of two different companies. Then you can come to know which company is doing better than the others. Sometimes there can be an industry benchmark also, and it can be compared with industry benchmarks also. And these will be useful for budgeting also sometimes. These are some of the theoretical aspects of ratio analysis. Generally go through them, don't just leave them, so that you can understand these things in detail. But the essence of that is already what we discussed. Nothing new will be there. And limitations of ratios is a theory question. It can be given also. Sometimes these all limitations also can be asked as theory question. So you just have a note of that. So generally when a particular company is having different types of product lines, diversified product lines, then the aggregate data may not be useful for inter-firm comparison. The Reliance Industries Limited is a so diverse company. It has so many businesses, completely different and not much related with each other also. So it has now, though it is not completely separated, the Geo Telecom is there and entertainment is there within the Reliance Industries, and petrochemicals is there, oil refining is there, retail is there. Like that, so many are there. So if we take the total Reliance Industries Limited final balance sheet and compare it with some other company, let us say something like say Larsen and Toubro, it doesn't make sense because the product lines of RIL are different, The service lines or product lines of L&T are different. These are contractors. They do works like building structures, metro stations, metro rail network itself, like that. Contractors they are. So that is a different line of business. So within the companies also there can be multiple product lines. Then the comparability may be an issue. That is the point. Same way, inflation can distort the financial data. That is also a point to be noted, because we don't consider inflation while calculating all these things. So the real values could be different from what we calculate. So that distortion is not actually separately identified by the ratios. That distortion is also carried in the financial ratios. That is a possibility. Seasonal factors also may influence the financial data. Suddenly, if you take the particular data from the point of view of stocks or etc., maybe they are too huge at that particular quarter. Maybe that is seasonal. So the seasonal factors cannot be ignored. Those are also part of it. Same way. So some of the things which people do is window dressing, so that the popularly used financial ratios should be looked as good, looked to be in good shape. So that window dressing is always common in real life, though it is not good and it is illegal also, but still people do that. So the ratios may look good, reality may be completely different from ratios. Difference in the accounting policies and accounting period also will be making it difficult for comparison. And no standard set of ratios are there against which a firm's ratios can be compared. Generally, there will not be. Sometimes there will be. Those are called benchmark ratios. When you have benchmark ratios for an industry, let us say for a particular industry, software industry, these are benchmark ratios. Who knows that? The software industry journals might have those things published, and a company can compare their own ratios with the benchmark ratios. But is this facility available to all? No. That is when limitations will come. Same way, we cannot generalize about a particular ratio, whether it is good or bad. This is always there, and we have seen it so many times. PE ratio itself, we have seen price to book value. Higher ratio is good or lower ratio is good, we don't know. Current ratio, higher is good or lower is good, still we don't know, because highest possible very high current ratio is also not a good thing. That is also bad from other point of view. So whether a ratio being higher or lower is good or bad is always difficult to generalize. That is the biggest limitation, and practically we have seen that also earlier. And these ratios are interrelated but not independent. They are all interrelated with each other. So because of that, there will be a lot of types of variables which might have an impact on the final conclusions. So the point is, yes, it is good to calculate ratios. It is important to calculate ratios. Analysis is important. However, finally, after all this analysis also, we cannot be 100% sure that this interpretation is correct. So that limitation has to be also known. Not that the entire limitations will wipe out all the things that we learned so far. Limitations will be there for anything. Ratio analysis is also not an exception. Now, this is what you are supposed to do. Definitely you have to write these things. I told you already, not just once, multiple times. And the summary of ratios is given very clearly here. It is easy to note them. So write this summary once again, one by one, remember them. Interpretation is okay, that we know already, we discussed already, we can generally go through that. But ratio has to be definitely, name of the ratio, formula of the ratio has to be written. Current ratio, current assets divided by current liabilities, like that. Quick ratio, cash ratio, defense interval, net working capital, equity ratio, debt ratio, not that much required, you can ignore them. Debt to equity ratio, then debt to total assets ratio, capital gearing ratio, proprietary ratio, debt service coverage ratio, interest coverage ratio, preference dividend coverage ratio, fixed charges coverage ratio, then turnover ratios, total assets turnover ratio, fixed assets turnover ratio, capital, working capital, inventory, debtors, or creditors turnover ratios. Then debtors velocity is different, payables payment period is different. Those also have to be known. Formula, each of the formula you have to write and remember. Then only we'll go to the next level called as problem solving. Without knowing the formula, there is nothing called problem solving. So profitability ratios also are there. Gross profit ratio, net profit ratio, operating profit ratio, and expenses ratios include cost of goods sold ratio, operating expenses ratio, financial expenses ratio. And profitability ratios also can be calculated on the basis of overall assets or investment. In general, this is a generalized formula. We cannot apply that particularly. These are particular formulae. Return on assets, return on capital employed, pre-tax and post-tax, and return on equity, very important. Then earnings per share, dividends per share, payout ratio, PE ratio, dividend yield, earnings yield, price to book. PTB, and Q ratio last. These are the various ratios. So you should write all of these ratios on the paper and you should practice them and remember them well. Then we will move on to solving various problems related to ratio analysis. Okay. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.